All right, let's get on with this. Let's get on with this. The question I want to ask you though is, how Chinese are we right now? How Chinese is Europe really? Because you hear people saying that we look at China and we should not become like China, and we're becoming like China with the AI, with the surveillance, and with the cameras everywhere. Everywhere you drive through the streets of Europe, you see Chinese style cameras standing around, monitoring everyone. So how Chinese are we getting? How Chinese is Europe? How much is this digital surveillance really going on in Europe right now? The question I want to ask today is, how Chinese is Europe today, right now? How Chinese, how much like China are we today? Honestly. Because we know in China, right? China is a country known for being a communist dictatorship. They're honest about this. They are a communist dictatorship. There is no freedom in China. Citizens do not have any freedom to choose, do not have any freedom to do anything the government doesn't want to, and to make sure that the Chinese citizens are constantly doing whatever the Communist Party of China tells them to. They are being monitored with cameras. Their social media is monitored. Everything that they do is monitored, tracked, traced. Everything that you could possibly do as a person in China ends up in a database somewhere, which is being monitored and tracked and followed up by the Chinese government. And people say, we should not do that in Europe. We should not do this in the West, because the West is supposed to be free, right? We're supposed to be free in the West. We're supposed to be free in Europe. So we say that we should not be like China. We should not follow our citizens from point A to point B, and just follow everything that they do and track everything that they do, and just have a government which knows everything and knows what you're doing and can tell you what you're supposed to do. We should not do this, and people in Europe say that we should not do this. But yet at the same time, people say we should not go to China. We should not become China. But you know what? I think that we are already there. We are China right now, to be honest. If you see what's really going on in Europe right now, we can say that we are China, as much as China is. Honestly, it's just that Europe is less open about it. Less open about it than the Chinese are. The Chinese Communist Party, hey, they say, yeah, we are communist, right? You know that when you step over the border into China, you know that your life does no longer belong to you. It belongs to the state. But here in Europe, we say, yeah, we're a free country. We are free, and you can do what you like, basically within reasonable limits, within the law. As long as you stick to the law, you'll be fine. You can do whatever the hell you like. But in reality, is this really true or not? Well, it's not. In reality, Europe is a lot more China-fied. It's a lot more like China than we are willing to admit. And I have reason to say this. I have reason to say this because I'm not making this up, right? I mean, if you drive through the streets of Europe, any European country, doesn't matter where, to be honest, whether it's Poland or Bulgaria or Belgium or France, especially France, then you see these cameras standing everywhere. You see security cameras everywhere, and not just the old-fashioned like traffic camera, the little grey boxes or whatever, or the CCTV cameras. No, you see different kind of cameras. You see poles standing next to the road, which are filled with different kinds of cameras. You got the old-fashioned kind of cameras, which look like cameras. Then you got the bulbous cameras, which see everything all the time, like the panopticon cameras, which see everything all the time with a little black bulb, like grey housing. And then you also have now the flat screens, which look like our telescreens or something, like straight out of 1984. I don't know what the hell these do. Some sort of facial scanning recognition, I don't know. But you see different kinds of cameras that seem to be rolled in straight out of China. And I do say straight out of China. And we know that they're rolled in straight out of China. How do we know this? Because even in the European Parliament, they installed cameras and heat sensors from China. But that's the point. We see these things everywhere, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And we see that fundamental, basic civil rights are on the back burner in Europe. They are on the back burner. Nobody who is actually in power in Europe seems to give a damn about fundamental, basic civil rights, such as your life is your own. You have a freedom to choose. You can say whatever the hell you like, basically, because we have a freedom of expression. We have the freedom to have your own opinion. You have the freedom to have your own dissenting opinion. And that is a valuable right. That is a valuable right that's worth fighting for. Absolutely, it's worth fighting for. Because as soon as you lose the right to have a different opinion, then you do no longer live in a free society. You no longer live in a functional democracy. You no longer live in a country where you actually want to live. At that point, you live in China. You live in Oceania. You live in 1984. That's where you live at that point. But hey, the politicians don't see this. The politicians clearly don't see this. Or maybe they do see this, but they just don't give a damn. I mean, that's a possibility, and I somehow suspect that that's a possibility. They just don't give a damn because they are so wrapped up in themselves. They are so technocratic. They are so wrapped up in their technocratic fantasies that they just think that everything that they're doing is all right. Or maybe, who knows, maybe they're actually being paid by the WF to do all these things. Who knows? Is it a possibility? Well, yeah. I mean, the WF did say that they've infiltrated governments on all levels and so on and so forth. So, you know, I'm not saying that they have. I'm not saying that this is the only possible answer to this conundrum why Europe's politicians are now so gung-ho against freedom of speech, so gung-ho against the freedom to have your own opinion. But it is a possible solution, it's a possible answer to this mystery. And the fact that they are gung-ho against freedom of expression, even that they are 100% against the freedom to protest against the government, or in other words, that European governments are against your right as a citizen to disagree with the government of your country. They have shown this, that they do not believe in this. They have shown this. We have seen this in the multiple police actions the last couple of years, where police were bashing up protesters, where police were bashing up citizens because they did not agree with the policies pushed through by the governments that ruled their countries. Many of these governments, by the way, stocked with politicians who themselves were never elected, fairly elected, sometimes even actually elected. Because do not forget that, for instance, Mario Draghi, the previous Prime Minister of Italy, was never actually elected. He just ended up somehow running the country from who knows where. Nobody knows how he actually ended up there, but at one point the previous Prime Minister was gone. The next point Mario Draghi was there. How Italy transitioned from that state of being to the next state of being without an election, who knows? Who can tell? But I ask you, is that democratic? Yes or no? Is that according to the democratic principles? Well, no, of course it isn't. And that is the point. Democracy, basic civic dignity, basic civil rights is not such a big thing in Europe anymore. And we see this because you may not have noticed this, by the way. I mean, I don't know what rock you were hiding if you didn't notice this, but you may not have noticed this, that for the past couple of months, upon months, what, year almost, even more actually, there have been continuing protests in France, because let's be honest, everybody hates Macron, and literally, like the majority of the population of France seems to really, really hate Macron. And the fact that he tried to, push through a pension reform, which he did not by convincing people that this is the right thing for the country, but by actually mandating it, using his presidential powers to just push it through and sidelining the French National Assembly, thereby doing actually a dictatorial act as a dictator, literally, which is what dictators do. They sideline democracy, they sideline parliaments, assemblies, any kind of citizen bodies, they sideline them, and they just say, yeah, because I said so, that's why this is gonna happen. That is what the guy did. That's what Macron did. That is a dictatorial act. That is literally the definition of what a dictator does. He dictates. He says that this is what's going to happen because I say so, and that's the only reason you need. This is what he did. And now we see that he's taken the next step because people have been protesting against him. Because people, of course, he's taking people's money away. That's pretty much what this means. He's fiddling with the pension laws in France, which means that the pensionable age is going to go up, which means that more people are going to have to work for a longer time to get the pension. Now, you might agree with this or disagree with this. Personally, I don't think that getting a pension is always a good idea for everyone, because we see lots of old people who get the pension and then it goes downhill for them because they don't know more what to do with their lives, because their entire meaning of life, basically, which is their work, has disappeared. We see this is a real problem, and there's also a real problem with the labor market, where old people are basically no longer welcome because they're close to the pensionable age. So who's going to hire them? These are things that you need to think about. These are things that we need to think about, and that's why personally I think that working with the pension laws, that this should be possible, but only if the people who are subjected to those laws actually agree with those laws. And in this case, the entire country, like literally the entire country of France, does not agree with these laws, but yet Macron pushed them through, which is why there have been massive protests against Macron and his dictatorial laws. Massive protests. Such protests that at some point, and this was, I believe, in last month, so July, I think around the 10th of July, Macron, President of France, floated the idea in social media that how we might stop these protests against me and these riots. What about if we just shut down social media in France? What if we just shut down all social media in France? Because the protesters are using social media to organize their protest. They're actually saying that people should come and protest and revolt even against the government. And we don't want people to revolt against the government. I mean, the French themselves know from their history what happens if people revolt against the government, that they can actually revolt against the government. Whenever French people have revolted against the government, that government, it fell. And now people are revolting against the government. But Macron and his cronies, they don't like that. And I say his cronies because he got his cronies in the European Commission as well. Cronies like Thierry Breton. And he doesn't like that. He doesn't like the fact that people are actually revolting against his rule. So what did he say? Well, like a proper dictator, he said, well, let's just shut down all social media. How about that? That's an idea. That's already really worrying, that a European president of a European country actually said, let's do this thing that dictatorships and juntas and regimes usually do, because that's such a good idea over there, like in the Middle East, or some banana republic in Central America. Let's do that there. They do that there, so let's do that here in the developed world, in our democracy. Let's just shut down people's rights to discuss stuff and talk about stuff and organize themselves. Let's do that. So he said that. I mean, I don't believe he actually did it, because people didn't like that. Hell, if you take people's social media away, then bad shit's gonna happen. Let's be honest about this. So he never did that, as far as I know. But the backlash was there. But then, to make things worse, even more stupid, then Thierry Breton, who is the EU's internal commissioner for internal affairs, he waded in and he said in an interview that, well, that's actually something we can do. The EU will allow that, yes. Of course, the EU will allow that because we've just enacted the DSA, which is the Digital Services Act. We've just enacted that. So, that will allow that. Yeah, that's good. We can allow that. Which is really crazy because the EU is supposed to be about fundamental rights, no? It's supposed to be about protecting our fundamental European rights. So how did it suddenly happen that the EU is saying, yeah, that's fine. Censorship, yeah, let's do that. This is crazy. In fact, what he said though was, this is what he said. For full enclosure, right? For transparency's sake, I'll just read you what he actually said. So what Thierry Breton said, Commissioner for Internal Affairs of the European Commission, he said this: when there is hateful content that calls, for example, for revolt, that also calls for killing and burning of cars, they will be required to delete the content immediately. And they, in this case, by the way, being the social media platforms. Now, this strikes me as a very, very worrisome thing to have been said by a European politician, a European policymaker. To begin with, the fact that he equates hateful content with revolt, with killing and burning of cars, as if that's the same thing, right? Of course, killing and burning, or killing, is not a good thing. And there's plenty of legislation in Europe right now that says that if you go online and you call for somebody to be killed, that's not okay, and you can be persecuted for that, or prosecuted for that. You can be prosecuted for that, and yeah, fine. There is, even to freedom of speech, there are decency limits of decency. Where you don't go online and say that people should be outright murdered. Sure, fine. You can defend that. You can argue that, but you can defend that. Personally, I think that we need to interpret freedom of speech really, really broadly. We need to interpret freedom of speech incredibly broadly, more broadly than is currently the case in Europe. It is too easy right now to send people to jail for something they said online. And with people like this, Thierry Breton, who say these things, there's no mystery why it's so easy to send people to jail for an opinion. Because he equates hateful content that calls for a revolt, that calls for killing and burning of cars, with each other. He says that that's pretty much the same thing. And it's not, because a revolt is not the same thing as killing and burning of cars. No. Revolt can basically is saying that we don't want this government, let's get rid of it, which is a legitimate standpoint. Many, many times in European history we've had revolts, and thank goodness for that. We've had revolts in the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, France. Hell, without a revolt, the French Republic would never have existed to begin with. It would still be a French monarchy. So a revolt is not necessarily a bad thing and cannot be equated to killing and burning of cars. It also cannot be equated to hateful content. And the problem with the term hateful content, they sling it around a lot, but the problem I have with that is that it's too vaguely defined. Who defines what hateful content actually is? Do we say that any kind of criticism of the government is hateful content? Do we say that any kind of discussion about different cultures of different people and what they call themselves is hateful? When I go out and say that I disagree with transgenderism, which I do strongly, is that hateful content? Well, yes, clearly. I've already been banned so many times for simply saying something and then logically arguing arguing it and defending my position in a logical and factual manner, that is called hateful speech. Is this okay? I do not believe that this is okay. But the problem is that this is all being made possible through the DSA, the Digital Service Act, which is a new piece of European legislation, which is, by the way, is going to be enacted. Well, it's already been enacted, but it's going to be effective from August the 25th of 2023. And I believe that this Digital Service Act is a huge, huge problem. It's worrying. It's really, really worrying how they are implementing this. Because the problem with this is, though, the whole point of the Digital Service Act was in the first place to bring big American social media platforms to heel, to bring them to heel, to make them follow some kind of rules, to stop censorship, to actually stop censorship online. But instead, we see that this has been turned around. Something that was actually a good idea to begin with has been turned around 180 degrees. So it's doing exactly what it's not designed for, exactly what it wasn't supposed to be doing in the first place. Because what does this do? Let me just explain a bit about the Digital Services Act. The Digital Services Act requires social media platforms, and these are the 19 biggest platforms in Europe right now by terms of users. The 19 biggest platforms, and then we're talking about platforms like Twitter, of course, Facebook. I'm not going to call it X because that's a stupid name. That is a stupid name. I'm also not going to call it Meta because that's also a stupid name. So, no. Twitter, Facebook, but also other platforms that you didn't think were platforms like Zalando, which sells fashion, Spotify, which basically sells music, music sharing platform. All these kinds of platforms are going to be forced to comply with the Digital Services Act. And how does the Digital Services Act work? Well, very simple. The Digital Services Act works by taking the biggest platforms in Europe and calling them, saying that you are now gatekeepers of information. This is literally what it says in the Digital Services Act. That's the term they use, gatekeeper. These social media sites are now gatekeepers of digital information. That's the status they have been awarded, and that means that they will have to censor any hateful content or misinformation that the European Commission, not the EU by the way, not the European Parliament by the way, but the European Commission labels as such. Anything that the European Commission labels as hateful content or misinformation will immediately have to be removed. By these social media platforms. And if they refuse this, well, then the European Commission, by way of Thierry Breton, has already said that they will be fined 6% of their global margin, of their global profit margin. And if they still persist in not censoring their users, then they might even be banned from the EU altogether. So it's censorship. It is outright censorship. It is making platforms, American companies, mostly American companies, not all, but mostly American companies like Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, of course, the gatekeepers of information, the gatekeepers of what is allowable and admissible and not online, the gatekeepers of opinion online. I find this worrisome. I mean, I really am worried about this. I don't know if I can continue this channel online after the 25th. of August. I don't know. I might not. I might just get kicked out. I might just get canned by YouTube. It's possible. Because don't forget, I've already been banned once for apparently spreading misinformation, even though it's just an opinion, and even though I actually back my opinions up with facts and figures and stuff like that. But the 25th, I might not be here anymore, not be allowed to be here anymore, just because I have an opinion, which is considered misinformation or hateful speech. And that is Europe in 2023. It's disturbing, isn't it? It's disturbing. And it is disturbing because Mr. Breton, he actually said in that interview that we have teams that can intervene immediately if these social media sites do not comply with the DSA. This is not something that we should see or expect in a democratic European Union which actually gives a damn about civil rights, freedom of expression, freedom of media, freedom of opinion, freedom in general. No, this is incompatible with the values that the EU is supposed to represent. It is incompatible. But shit, this is what the hand we've been dealt, eh? This is what we have right now. And it gets worse and worse and worse. It doesn't get worse. Actually, it does get worse, because don't forget, next year, 2024, there's the Paris Olympics. This is batshit crazy. The Paris Olympics. And it's scheduled. And the thing about the Paris Olympics, not that anybody apparently seems to give a damn about this. Did you even know there were Paris Olympics? I mean, yeah. I think it's going to be a huge bummer, just like the World Cup in Qatar. You know, it's a non-event, but still, people are going to show up for this. And the worrisome thing about that is that the French government has announced that they have the intention of filling the country with AI-driven security cameras. AI-driven security cameras, which will allow them to monitor every person in France, or at least every person in Paris, to facially recognize them, to use facial recognition software on them, to register everything about anybody who visits the Olympics. And the best thing for these people, the best thing for the camera salesman, I guess, the best thing for the government of France, who does not believe in freedom or civil rights, is that they will only need 8 technicians to monitor millions of people. 8, because it's all AI driven. It's all driven by a computer filter, a computer program, which will allow a small team of people to monitor everyone who goes to the Olympics. And the worst thing is that at no point did the French government think that, shit, isn't this going a bit too far? Isn't it? And no point did the EU as well say that, wait a second, this is incompatible with our values within the EU. This is far too much like China. You know, I mean, we're not China, so let's not do this. No. Instead, the French government said, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do that. And the EU then said, yeah, that's fine. There's no problem with us whatsoever. I mean, even GDPR, which basically says that nobody can take your picture unless you give written permission or express permission, is not allowed to get in the way. Nope, none of it. The EU said that's fine. French people, you monitor each other like you never monitored each other before. You go get at it. I mean, this is disturbing shit, man. This is disturbing shit, but this is the EU that we live in today. And you know what? We need to do something about this. And you know what? Next year, 2024, European elections, and we better make damn sure that the European parliaments get filled with people who actually understand this shit and who actually want to do something about it. How about that? And we need to make sure that we get rid of the European Commission. We need to get rid of the European Commission, because those European Commissions are evil bastards. They're evil, all of them. They have all been working hard to destroy Europe. It's as simple as that. So we need to get rid of them. We need to get rid of them ASAP. So that's that, eh? That's that. It's not very good, but hey, at least we know, and at least we can do something about it, because we can do something about this. Sure, these laws, they don't need to stand forever. They don't need to stand forever. Any law that's been written can be unwritten, can be erased. So we need to do this, and we need to get in the European Parliament. We need to take over Europe and the EU for sane European people who still believe in freedom and democracy and transparency and civil rights and all that good shit. So how about it? Alright, thank you very much. See you next time.